This is IVP. This is The Disruptors, a podcast from InterVarsity Press about how faith is changing culture in unexpected ways. I'm Nancy Wong Yoon. I'm a sociologist, a pop culture expert, and a professor at Biola University.
New eyes that look at the world in new ways. New eyes make contact, blue, green, and gray. New eyes I realized I never knew. When you realize feelings you trapped inside of you. New eyes that see the respect you.
I am here, as usual, with my friend G.
Hello.
Hi, G. This week I talked to Dr. Peace Amadi. She's a mental health expert and she's an associate professor of psychology. So that's similar to your field, right? Cognitive science.
But I know nothing about feelings or any of that stuff. I'm making statistical models that predict the world, man. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I don't know enough about the psychology field. It's wide, just like sociology is, right? And so, Dr. Peace is a TED speaker, TV host, and she's the author of Why Do I Feel Like This? Understand Your Difficult Emotions and Find Grace to Move Through.
I almost feel like her name is like a precursor to like what she's an expert in. She's like, my name is Peace. I'm going to bring you some inner peace, man. You know?
Yes. Talking to her, I think unlocked some of it felt like a little bit like a therapy session for me. I got to ask her all the questions that, things that came up in her book that I thought were really applicable. I think not just in the church, but even beyond. I think she talked about spiritual bypassing, which is, I think, when people are going through a tough time, it's so easy, I think, for friends or colleagues to just be like, well, everything happens for a reason, or, you have so much to be grateful for,
oh my gosh,
right?
So bland. So bland.
And then also Christians that might say, like, just pray about it,
oh,
right? And so these kinds of things, we talked about how it's a way to essentially, we do this kind of talk to ourselves even, right? That we just need to be positive and get through it, but that these things that have become socialized into society to avoid pain are actually very destructive.
Well, I can't wait to hear this episode then.
So, Peace, I am also a UCLA alum. I'm wearing my UCLA sweatshirt.
I love us.
I majored. What did you also major in psychology then?
I did.
Okay,
did you?
I majored in English, creative writing, actually, and then I only took like an intro to sociology. But for some reason, I thought, you know what, I can go ahead and get a PhD in sociology. So it was a little. I didn't know. I'd never been, no one in my family has a PhD. I am so thrilled to welcome Dr. Peace Amadi, who is a mental health expert and an associate professor of psychology and leadership at Hope International University, which is, I think, just down the street from Biola, which is where I teach. She is also a TED speaker and TV host. She is the author of Why Do I Feel Like This? Understand Your Difficult Emotions and Find Grace to Move Through. Welcome, Dr. Amadi.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Nancy.
Ooh, this is cool. We could just continue to call each other like Dr. Phil, Dr. Nancy, Dr. Peace.
All of them. That actually sounds like a great panel. We should make that happen.
Well, it makes it kind of informal, but still acknowledges, right, that the fact that we do have, doctorates, and we did do some research and have some education in order to speak on the topics of our expertise. So,
yeah.
And I'm so excited to kind of draw on your expertise today, because on The Disruptors, we've been talking to a lot of people who are disrupting culture, and that takes a lot. That takes a toll mentally, spiritually. And you write in your book, Why Do I Feel Like This? Like, we need to learn how to embrace our pain, both individually and I think collectively. And I find that, we're not very equipped to do that as a people, as a church, as a society. And I wanted to know, how do we do this well? How do we embrace our pain individually and help each other deal with the pain that's, coming out of childhood trauma, out of continual trauma?
I care for the church. I care for people who are coming up in the church and, have faith, but I've been really personally disillusioned and disappointed by how much we have lacked an ability to help people understand their own pain, understand their own mental health, and be able to heal in an actual, true way. And so a lot of that starts with understanding our emotions and how we've been designed to experience both positive and negative emotions, pleasant and difficult emotions for our own healing, for our own health, for our own connection, for the things that kind of make a difference in the lives that we're living. So I'm wanting to bridge the gap. I'm wanting to bridge the gap between those who've come up in the church or any other kind of system or institution that has sort of robbed them of a good relationship with their emotions, and helping people understand that these things, these emotions are really things we need to lean into, for our own sake.
Yeah, because you mentioned, and this has happened to me so much, and I've probably also done it, right? The kind of spiritual bypassing. I love that term that you have in your book about how when we use spiritual ideas to belittle our own needs, feelings, as well as those of others. So like terms like just pray about it, or there's a reason for everything. God has a plan for you, and you have so much to be grateful for. I find that, oh man, I find that those are just excuses not to kind of deal with pain.
Our emotions are our pathway to healing. So, if you think about, again, going back to my first point about emotions being our friends, our allies, our advocates. I mean, our emotions are literally telling us what we need in our lives. They're telling us what has been missing. They're telling us needs that have gone unmet. They're telling us, that we're lonely, that we're sad, that we're disconnected, that, something has been unjust, something has been unfair, that boundaries have been crossed. Like, our emotions are literally trying to save our life. And so when we use anything, particularly, spiritual concepts and platitudes like just let go and, let God and just forgive and just don't worry about it, we're really kind of threatening, if not cutting off, our ability to get exactly what we need in that moment. We literally cannot heal when we bypass our emotions. Our emotions are trying to tell us what we need. When we bypass them, we cut off we obstruct the pathway to healing. So I'm kind of like hell bent on getting churches, getting communities, getting people of faith, getting people who are deconstructing faith, and even people who have left the faith because of these things, to sort of unlearn these messages that it's easy, or it's even possible, or that it's right to just let go and let God, or to believe everything happens for a reason. That one is a particularly controversial one because, there's theologies around everything happens for a reason. But me, as a mental health professional, as a behavioral scientist, as someone who has, previously practiced therapy and been in the room with people who have been raped and molested and have lost their children and, lost their parents and, like just deeply wounded. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that God made you go through that. Like, that God was like, you know what? I really want this person to, learn like about my goodness. So I'm going to get them raped. And then, then they're going to see how good I am. Like, does that make sense? Like, why would you believe in a God that does that? That's not the God I see. That's not the God I believe in. That's not a God I can get with. And that's not a God I would tell anybody about. That's not a God I'll be proud to be aligned with when I've seen the type of things that people go through. So everything happens for a reason. Maybe some things happen for a reason, but everything certainly does not in my eyes. That doesn't make sense to say, but that is a very common thing that is said in churches and spiritual communities to people in pain. I'm not okay with that. I'm angered by that. And I would like for us to change how we view pain, change how we view trauma, change how we view our emotions, change how we view God for those who still consider themselves believers.
I think on the one hand, we want to believe that God is good and all things happen, according to God's purpose, which actually you're right that you do believe that in everything we can find purpose,
Yes.
even if things are not happening for a reason that is knowable or ever knowable, or even that there even exists a reason at all, right?
Right.
And so I think that that's the nuance. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between happening for a reason and then finding purpose in our trauma?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And wow, you really read my book. Thank you.
I always do. Dr. Nancy doing her homework.
I love that. Yeah. So, yes, for me, the difference, or what I teach the different is, a reason sort of indicates like that sort of implies like there was a premeditation and there was a premeditator. There was somebody sitting there. I have a reason for putting you through this. And so when we're using that, this idea in spiritual context, in faith context, where the implication here is that God, he sort of premeditated you going through a trauma so that you can learn a lesson. And like I said, that doesn't work for me. And I don't think that works for a lot of people. When you really think about the type of things that we've been through, I think things happen. I think bad things happen. I think bad things happen because of the world we're living in. I believe in the idea of free will, God giving us free will, and that being that meaning that a lot of people are going to do some effed up things to each other. And that's just what the world is. We live in a world full of both light and darkness, and things happen. We're running and things are happening and things are being destroyed. And, theologically, there's supposed to be an end to all of it. And I don't want to get into all that, but in the world we live in, there's a lot of darkness and things happen. There's a lot of bad people and bad things happen. Now, I do believe, though, that God has given us the power. God has given us the sense. God has given us the support to be able to take the worst things we've been through and create some sort of meaning out of it. So I don't know why you got raped. I hate that you got raped. I am going to, create I'm going to protest and, vote for certain policies and like stand up to the fact that you got raped. Like, I'm not going to tell you there was a reason for that. But as someone who, wants to be a part of your healing, I'm going to explore with you, how can we take this and create meaning out of it? How can we take this and, through our own healing process, or along with our own healing process, help other people heal? How can we be to somebody what we didn't get? Those types of things actually help us heal. Like, part of our healing process is often being able to to share and to contribute. Years ago, I created and ran a nonprofit with young girls who've all experienced all kinds of traumas. And part of the work was them kind of retelling their story and being able to share their news story with people, and also taking people under their wing to sort of like help them in their healing process. And that really was the difference between someone who was able to move forward from their pain and someone who was, appropriately so, like understandably so, still stuck in it. That sharing and that contributing, that being able to give to somebody maybe what you couldn't get yourself. All of that is a big part of our healing process, and all of that creates meaning and a sense of purpose, even though we've been through the hardest thing someone can go through. I think that's what makes a big difference for people who are able to move forward, is not understanding or finding out the reason why they were so hurt, but saying, this is what happened to me. I'll never understand why. It'll never be okay. But I'm going to take this, I'm going to heal, and I'm going to help other people heal too.
What about sharing, though, in unsafe spaces? I mean, sometimes when you share publicly, you don't know who's listening. And I just think about sometimes I'll share, like, let's say, I shared one time with a colleague about like some microaggression I had witnessed, right? I don't even actually think it was myself. It was like a microaggression that happened to someone else, and the person was immediately like, "Oh, well, that didn't happen," you know. And I remember feeling, "Wow, I shouldn't have even shared with her because that actually re-traumatized me." So, how do you know, avoid those kind of situations, or maybe I don't know, maybe it's unavoidable if you are going through this process of sharing with folks your
Yeah,
experience.
you bring up a great issue of safety. Safety is a really, really, really important part of the healing process. And I would not advise you sharing your trauma with somebody or with a community or with a leader that does not feel safe. Um, it's part of the reason why me, like so many other people are, champions of therapy, because therapy is a safe space. It typically is a safe space for you to go and share your trauma, share your pain. And, that I will always champion that as a very important part of the healing process. I mean, some people are able to fare without it, but most people require additional support and being able to move through trauma and heal, from trauma when trauma can be healed from. I think, not I think, safety is a prerequisite for healing. And so I wouldn't suggest you sharing your story or you trying to explore, purpose and meaning with your story with a person or in a space that does not feel safe. And your body knows what that feels like. Your body knows when you're safe and when you're not safe.
So I'm thinking about in that case, it was a colleague that actually was maybe a like a friendly colleague. So I don't, but we had never talked about race before, right? So then I think that when I started to talk about it, I think I probably started to sense that she wasn't feeling me, but it was kind of already too late. I already started the story. So then, I mean, I guess it's hard to kind of avoid in maybe work situations or just kind of, I guess, having boundaries, right? Where you don't
Yeah.
talk about certain things.
Yeah, having boundaries. As soon as you learn something is not safe, don't keep doing it. Like stand up for yourself, advocate for yourself. Like, if it means in the conversation, you know what, this no longer feels safe, so I would like not to continue this conversation, which I say actually quite often, particularly in conversations dealing with race and justice and, my experiences being a Black woman and all of that, especially having worked in predominantly white spaces for much of my life. Like, these conversations come up, invitations to be a part of, roundtables and discussions come up where I begin to talk, I begin to share, and I realize immediately this is not a safe space. These are people that uh, not only don't understand, but aren't willing to understand. And I don't need to prove myself. I don't need to prove my experiences. I don't need to do any of that. So, if I'm going to have to work hard to justify and validate myself, you're already telling me this is not a safe space. So, you know what? I'm not going to participate, or I don't think I want to continue this conversation with you. And that's okay. So, going back to something you said a few minutes ago, you may not always know right away, that you're in conversation or in a space that's not going to be safe, whether it's because they don't understand your trauma or understand your race or understand your faith or understand your experience, whatever the case may be. Because it's not like, people have, labels. I'm safe, I'm not unsafe. Like, you learn that in time, you learn that in process. But like I said, your body always knows. So as soon as you feel it, it's okay. And it's my recommendation that you cut that off at that moment. You can process later whether, you want to like kind of re-engage this conversation again at another time, or, be a part of like, teaching whoever you're talking to what it means to be safe. I mean, this will all look different based off the space you're in, who you're with, because I'm immediately thinking of being kind of in a romantic relationship with someone who does something that doesn't feel safe. And in that moment, because you're committed to this relationship, you attempt to teach them what makes you feel safe versus, another situation where, like, going back to the example, that I was sharing, you're in a department meeting and you're talking with people who are looking at you crazy and looking like, you know, like they just don't really care to listen to what you have to say. I'm not committed to deep relationship with you. So what? Conversation over. And that's okay. And that's how we advocate for ourselves. And to bring it back to like my kind of the first thing I was talking about as far as our emotions, I talk about, I spend a chapter talking about anxiety and how anxiety generally, at least the way I like to talk about it is a signal that we don't feel safe. So when I say like the body knows when we're safe, if we're in a room, if we're in a relationship, if we're, interacting with someone and we're all of a sudden feeling all of this anxiety, that, our first thought shouldn't be, oh, here I go being anxious again. Our first thought should actually be, this is trying to tell me something. Perhaps I'm not safe.
Yeah.
Perhaps my body is literally advocating in this moment for me to self-protect, to self-preserve. Like we feel these things for a reason. We have the ability to feel these things for a reason. These aren't good or bad things. These are simply messages. So if I'm feeling a ton of anxiety all of a sudden when I'm trying to share about my trauma or my experience as a Black woman or whatever, my anxiety is giving me a chance to say like, you know what, let me step back from this because I need to understand kind of, I just want to listen to me. And I'm feeling like something here is not good, is not right. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm triggered. Maybe it's taking me back to childhood. Maybe this is, too much. Or maybe my emotion is literally telling me I'm not safe and I need to listen to it.
Yeah, this reminds me, I just was in a Zoom meeting where I was really, really felt probably, I think the person might have been attacking me, but it was like attacking an issue that I cared about. And then it seemed to be like going down a path that I had no control over. So I actually did say like, I'm going to say one last thing and I'm going to get off. That was what I said. Because I realized that it wasn't, my presence was unhealthy for me, and it wasn't actually advancing, the actual project that I was passionate about. So I actually did just do that, and I think it was a breach, right? It's like a social breach when you do that, and I think a lot of people are maybe afraid to do that. But I felt it was liberating for me because I was like, I don't have to be here, and I don't have to take this anymore. And lots of people actually contacted me afterwards, and it actually activated some of the students that were in the room. So I think that sometimes, you think that you're going to do something wrong if you actually, protect yourself and actually just say, I'm out. But in actuality, it's, I think my partner was saying, he's like, it's like the NBA coach that gets, a technical foul in order to kind of rally his team.
Yeah.
Gets thrown out of the game. He's like, that's what you did. You got thrown out of the game and it actually made a statement. So I totally agree that to kind of set boundaries and to let people know, like, this isn't working for me and I'm out. And and actually makes people think about, because it stops business as usual, right? Like, and it makes people actually, I think, assess the moment for themselves. So I think, what I did was maybe I also represented some of the other people that were in the room that maybe felt uncomfortable as well, right? So I totally, I just realized after talking to you, I was like, I did that recently.
Good. I'm really happy to hear that. And I would encourage you to continue to feel the freedom to do that. And anybody listening, because like I said, whatever you felt was signaling that something, stopped being okay. And so, you said something along the lines of, sometimes we feel like it's wrong, and to do that. And that's all conditioning. And that's part of what I want to understand. Part of what I want people to understand is that we have been conditioned since the day we left the womb, right? To do all kinds of things, in all different kinds of contexts. And part of adulting, if you asked me, is starting to sort of peel back why we think certain things are right and why we think certain things are wrong. And is there really an objective truth there? Or is this literally like conditioning, from the church, from, a patriarchy, from whatever, whatever the case may be? Like, let's question why we think certain things are wrong to do. Obviously, I imagine I'm speaking to smart people who aren't going to sit here and, say like, oh, so let me re-question whether murder is wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you guys all know what I'm talking about here, but it's more of these nuanced things that I would like us to reconsider individually and collectively, because there's a lot of things that we feel are wrong, that are not okay, that we don't give ourselves permission to do, which could actually save our life.
Yeah, especially as a Asian American woman, I think that there are expectations that are maybe from society, from from family of origin, of just expecting me to just go with the flow, to not make waves, to not question, to not complain, to not be angry, all those things that are absolutely, like you said, these are emotions. I mean, in that meeting, I was actually shaking. Like I started to feel myself shaking with I don't know whether it was anger, whether it was feeling of injustice, feeling like something was wrong, and that was my like, because you write in your book about like when you repress, when you don't let emotions kind of out, you can have physical repercussions, right? You can have actually physical health problems that result from not being able to access, not being able to really kind of release your emotions. And so, yeah, I definitely felt like I was experiencing that, and I was like, oh, this is not okay.
Yeah, emotions are energy, so we're going to feel it. They're going to manifest regardless. So you might as well lean in and and talk it out.
I felt so empowered by my conversation with Dr. Peace Amadi. And honestly, we could have filled out the entire season of The Disruptors with all the questions I had about emotions. So if you're enjoying this conversation and you want to dive deeper into some of the topics we touched on, like spiritual bypassing, safety, or trauma, you will definitely want to pick up a copy of her book, Why Do I Feel Like This? Understand Your Difficult Emotions and Find Grace to Move Through. In the book, Dr. Peace emphasizes how important it is for us to pay attention to our feelings and how our emotions are our friends. I resonated with her calling out casual dismissals of trauma in the name of God as offensive, and agree with her hope to see us grow in compassion for others and for ourselves. And I feel like she nailed it when she wrote, I don't believe that everything happens for a reason, but I do believe that in everything we can find purpose. Order your copy of Why Do I Feel Like This by Peace Amadi today at ivpress.com. Plus, as a listener of the Disruptors podcast, you can also get 30% off plus free U.S. shipping when you use the promo code DISRUPT. Who else grew up clipping coupons? Visit ivpress.com today and pick up your copy of Why Do I Feel Like This? So for people of faith in marginalized groups, often I feel like there's this added layer of like, we're supposed to all love each other and get along. Why don't you understand me? And why are you questioning me? Sometimes questioning my very like identity, right? That being questioned, that my feelings about injustice are not valid. Right? How does this happen when you're in communities of faith? How do you deal with that? Because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I've experienced a lot of that kind of trauma.
Oh man, girl, that's a whole other that could be a whole other podcast. But I mean, first of all, thanks for naming that, because that's a very real phenomenon. Like, intersectionality is a real thing. And so when we're talking about we're talking about our social identities, but we're also talking about like our, lived experiences, and that, spiritual bypassing for one person can happen at one level. But for another person, because they're, a woman, or they're, Black or Asian, or they're queer, or they're, single. That's another thing I bring up in the book, like whatever the case may be, like it just adds more opportunities to be spiritually bypassed and to be spiritually gaslit. So, there's implications of having intersecting identities and experiences as well, even when it comes to spiritual bypassing and spiritual gaslighting. Which is like crazy, like what some of us go through just trying to be a part of the church. So what to say to that is first just acknowledging that that's real, acknowledging that having, multiple social identities and different experiences and being a part of a marginalized group not being a white male adds layers to this experience and adds opportunities for you to be further traumatized in the church. And that's just the reality of the situation, especially given how much white supremacy and patriarchy is in the church in the first place. Like, of course, you and I are going to be hit harder by certain things and certain communities if they're rolling a certain way. So just acknowledging and validating that, like, that's a real concern, and that it's like we're getting multiple bullets at a time sometimes. And I think when that is the case, it's really important to have support. It's really important to be able to have somebody, whether there's someone who, looks like you, understands you, validates who you are, or so someone who looks like you and understands you because they live a similar experience to you, or someone who is like doing the work to understand you. But regardless, it's really, really important to have support, to have someone saying, like, you make sense, your feelings make sense, like your trauma makes sense, your concern makes sense, the fact that you're feeling, more bullets than the average person makes sense. Like, that really goes a long way for feeling like you're not crazy. And I feel like that's been a big part of my personal journey, just even over the last few years, is being able to validate myself and the concerns I've had working in predominantly white Christian spaces. So I teach at a private Christian university that is mostly white, politically conservative leaning, and just I'm grateful for my work, but I've seen a lot of things. And I think a part of me in the beginning just felt like, oh, I'm being dramatic. Like that was a weird thing to say to me, but I'm being dramatic. Oh, that was a weird thing to, witness. I'm being dramatic. But now it's like, what? Like, this is gaslighting and this is bypassing. And I am being othered right now, and my experiences are being invalidated, and that's real. And so it's been easier to come to that place because I have a community of people, a couple within my department, but a lot more outside of it, that just get me and get why this is hard and ugly, and painful. That helps me stand in my truth. Whether I decide to leave or not, is one thing, but at least I'm able to say this is a real thing. Like, what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing is real. There is a problem. Support and people who mirror that really help being able to stand in that, which makes you feel, that you're not crazy. And that's big. Validation is big.
Yes. Yes to all that. It's sometimes scary to talk about it openly because, we don't always get that validation, and sometimes even our faith is questioned, right? Because our faith is intersecting with our identities, and we have these lived experiences, we have these traumas, and to kind of have that questioned. And somehow that makes us less Christian for naming these things. Like, I never understand that, right? Because that seems like the opposite of compassion, the opposite of what Jesus would have done. And so, how do we deal with kind of the invalidation of our Christianness when we bring up, racism, sexism, all sorts of bigotry? How do we deal with that?
We have to first name it. So that being your faith being questioned because you are observing and sharing things that are valid and make sense to you, like you being questioned in your reality, but you on top of that being questioned in your faith, is gaslighting. So what we do when that happens is we name it. We don't internalize it and say, I'm crazy, I'm being dramatic, I'm not taking one for the team, I'm bringing discord, or, whatever Christians like to say. It's like, actually, I'm being spiritually gaslit, because, spiritual gaslighting is anything used by a spiritual leader, by a spiritual community member, with spiritual language, to discredit your experience, discredit your reality, discredit, your memory, discredit your sanity, cause doubt around your spiritual standing with, the sovereign. Like that is spiritual gaslighting. So if you have an experience that is very true to you, further validated by people who look like you and understand you, and you're trying to share this and are being bypassed or are being, kind of called things, that you're not, you need to just say, I'm being spiritually gaslit right now. Then you can deal with what you want to do with that. Do you want to call that out? Because that's what I've been doing recently. You're spiritually gaslighting me. And then
What's the response when you say that?
Anger, rage. And I'm like, that's fine, because I've been feeling anger and rage for the last 10 years. So, I have no problems with you. If I'm going to be angry, you're going to be angry. Like, if you want me at peace, then let's really work to get peace. Like, no more of this. I'm going to feel all these bad, negative things about myself while you get to go around willy-nilly, ignorant about the impact of your actions. I'm just not, that's not fair. We as people of color, we as women of color, we need to stop being okay with, us feeling all these things and then everybody else just going about their work, like without a care in the world. Like that's not fair, because it's always that. That's always the split. Ignorance is bliss. They're happy, fine, at peace, think work is great, and we're over here fuming and hurting. Like that's not fair. So I'm gonna stop suppressing myself, and like lying to myself, or at least lying to you for the sake of peace and reconciliation. Like if I'm at this point, I'm just gonna need to be real. I'm gonna call out what I see. Now, to be realistic, there's very real implications to this, right? Because if you're at the wrong place, with the wrong person, you don't have any support, your actual, livelihood could be on the line. But the flip side of that is, if you are someone who, it's good to be someone who like keeps everything, documents everything, like keeps record of everything to the best you can, because there is more support, I feel like, in like the legal space to actually fight back if it needs to go that way. I think also, particularly as women and women of color, I don't think we lean into that enough. Like, as long as if you're doing your job and you're not being, disrespectful, unprovoked, there's no reason for you to lose your job over an honest conversation. You know what I mean? There's no reason to lose your job over sharing emotion. Like, so, I'm not giving legal advice, but I just think there's a lot of things that we don't lean into when we have the total authority to. And so me realizing that, it's like, well, I'm doing my job. I'm doing a great job, actually. I'm not calling you outside your name. I'm not, falling short of any code of conduct. I'm just letting you know how I feel, and I'm calling you out for what I need to call you out for. So, or if you want to take my job away from me when I'm not ready to go, then we can get legal, because I've done nothing wrong. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, that's real. All of this is real talk right here. And thank you. I feel very encouraged by that. And yes, to suffer in silence, or to suffer in kind of small corners of places is not healthy, and it can have these long-term impacts, I think, on not just your psychology, but your body. And I've seen this over time, with people looking really ragged over a time, of suffering and not being able to speak up because of the gaslighting that you're talking about, right? And this is not what God intends in terms of thriving, and certainly, it's not quote unquote Christian. But I think that even as we're coming into the holidays, I feel like a lot of families. So how does this work in the family situation? Because I think a lot of families either avoid talking about this, or avoid talking about how they're feeling about whatever is going on in society. I know a lot of people who've actually had to cancel people in their lives because of kind of impasses, right? Where people are having impasses over what they deem to be deal breakers in terms of morality, ethics, and so like, the holidays coming up, what do we do when it's a family situation, when they're, these are people that we love but who have maybe hurt us or are still hurting us?
My
Yeah.
family, I have a great family, by the way, but there's certain conversations or certain questions I don't want, and they know that. And it's like this, I can't entertain this right now. And I've had to say that a few times, and now people take heart. And so it's easier to, spend time with certain family during the holidays because they understand like peace, this is not a road peace wants to go down. That's my boundary. I've had to remind people a couple times, but because I have a great family, everyone's like, okay, we get it. Like, this is not a road we're going to go down, you know? But if I reminded people a couple times and I realized they weren't able to like uphold those boundaries, then maybe I wouldn't be spending as much time with those people. Maybe I'd just say, I can't be there this holiday, which is hard, but you make the decision, what's worth it to you, what you can handle, what you can't handle. And that's okay to honor that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's, I think in traditional families, in traditional Christian families, a lot of times people are like, okay, no matter what, we got to be there, even if we're hurting, even if we're getting critiqued to death, even if we're getting asked questions that are totally, crosses boundaries. Or sitting with, the uncle that's like, really, really, has out of, this world kind of ideas about, whether it's vaccination to politics, whatever it is. I think it's like, I think we're forced, or a lot of times we feel so much kind of internal as well as maybe familial pressure to just sit there and take it, right? Because that's what we're supposed to do with family. And so I love that you are saying that, we can actually maybe set like some ground rules, right?
Yeah.
Before the holiday table, saying like, you know what, I would really like to avoid these topics, or if they're at any time I don't feel comfortable, I may have to get up and leave and come back. So to just kind of set those, it's almost like, rules of engagement, right?
That's exactly what it is. I actually love that term. I use that term often in general. There's rules of engagement for everything. And oftentimes you have to set them, you have to create them. And that's good. That's powerful.
So as we come to the end of our time, I can't believe it just flew by. I usually ask guests, like, are they reading something, watching something, or listening to something that is, I usually say disruptive, but since we're talking to you, Dr. Peace, that is there something healing or something, that can help us kind of get through? I mean, we are still in this pandemic. We are, I think so many of us are mentally kind of on the edge of, breaking down at all times. So what have you been consuming recently that have given you some healing?
This is actually not something that I'm consuming so much, but something I'm doing is actually being very intentional and okay with just taking care of my basic needs. So I'm someone who typically likes to, I work 24/7. I'm always grinding. I'm always visioning. I'm always trying to figure out the next step, build, expand, all of that. Like that's my typical MO. But in this season, just because I'm burnt out, like I think a lot of us are, I'm mentally exhausted. I'm talking with my therapist about whether, what I'm experiencing is like literally depression or not. Like it's just so much happening internally that I realize the most important thing for me to do is sleep, eat, like move a little bit more slowly. So I think for a lot of us, the disruptive thing is to just take care of our basic needs. Like those of us who want to change the world, are changing the world, have influence, have platform, have a lot of people looking up to us, all of that, which is beautiful. I think at this time we need to give ourselves permission to kind of lay that down for a second and just take care of us for a moment. So it's been a strange past couple weeks because I haven't done anything I'm supposed to do this month or fourth quarter. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll get, energy in another, couple weeks. But I don't have that energy right now. So it's like, you know what? I guess these goals I had for fourth quarter, I may not get, but I am healing myself by sleeping. And I am healing myself by, eating nutritiously, by resting, by saying no, by switching up a plan that is too much for me. That's what I'm doing.
Nancy, wow, there was so much that came up in that interview. I feel like, you're disrupting the disruptors, but she's interviewing the interviewer too. She's helping you process some things. What stuck out to you from that interview?
I think what Peace helped me with the most is setting boundaries, right? Because I asked her about, so what do you do when you're talking to someone and you realize they are spiritually gaslighting you, essentially, or bypassing you, where they're basically not listening to you and your pain and they can't sit with that. And so then they maybe blame you for getting into that situation, or even if especially in cases of like racism or bigotry, they might say like, well, that's not very, Christian, or that's not like, that doesn't really happen, right?
Right.
I loved how she just told me to just like, you can actually just name it and get yourself out of that situation, even if it causes the other person anger, right?
Yeah,
so
which is not something we're comfortable with as Christians, as women, as Asian Americans. Like, that is not something that anyone has told us it's okay to do.
Yes, and that all those feelings that you're feeling that are maybe causing you distress, that those are actually your body and your brain telling you something that you need to address rather than suppressing it and refusing it. It's actually your body's warning system. That's what she shared. And that's just great, right? To be able to say, okay, I trust myself. I trust that I am feeling this way because my body is telling me, okay, you need to deal with this issue deeply and not just kind of like continue to ignore this, because then that's when the issues become trauma and triggers and actually then can actually change your personality and harm yourself and the people around you. So.
And that's so different in how we think about anger, because instead of thinking about that as the end outcome, we think about it as part of the process. It's a signal. I love the way she said, she talked about that as something that we need to see and recognize and bring it into our processing.
Yeah, and I love that when I asked her if she could recommend something to our listeners, she just said like, I'm not listening or consuming anything. I am just trying to take care of myself. I am just trying to sleep more, eat healthier, and just really, self-care in a intentional way, rather than thinking, okay, I need to read another book. I need to, I need another, just kind of down to basics. And I really appreciate that, because I really hope that our listeners will be able to take away from this episode to be gentle with themselves and to listen to their bodies, their feelings in ways that are healing.
Remix our colors like we cover pop songs in a bottle, how we battle all the barriers, right? Some drink, some color their hair every night. Some try to stand out, some try to act white. Found music, but I've never been the stereotype. New eyes break old lies. New skin needs new wine.
Thank you for listening to The Disruptors. The Disruptors is hosted by me, Nancy Wong Yoon. You can follow me at Nancy, WYUEN. Our theme song is New Eyes by Jason Chu. Our executive producers are Helen Lee and Andrew Bronson. Produced by Richard Clark, Cray Allred, and Mila Kim.